Discovering the truth about Jesus' skin tone and face will astound you. Was Jesus really who we know him to be? Amazing information about Jesus' looks that aren't even mentioned in the Gospels may be found in the letter Pilate sent to the Roman Emperor Tiberius about him. He also discusses Jesus' miracles, trial, crucifixion, and, believe it or not, resurrection in this letter. However, what is said in this letter? What may Pilate have told the emperor about the Son of God's bodily appearance and resurrection? "Greetings, Majesty," Pilate writes at the beginning of his letter to Tiberius Caesar the emperor. "The recent events in my province have been so astounding that I feel obliged to tell you all about them, because I think that they may, in the future, affect the destiny of our empire. It is as if all the gods have suddenly abandoned us, and I am almost tempted to say that the day I took over the rule of Judea from Valus was cursed, because ever since then, my life has been full of concerns and difficulties. I immediately occupied the pretorium and prepared a magnificent feast as soon as I arrived in Jerusalem. When the scheduled time arrived, no one appeared, including the high priest and a tetrarch from Galilee. This, in my opinion, was a sign of contempt for both the Roman government and my authority. A few days later, the high priest paid me a visit with a serious yet dishonest face. He claimed that his religion forbade him from eating with Romans, but his expression made it clear that he and his followers were against the Romans. I advised the Romans to keep an eye out for the high priests in this area, as they would not hesitate to betray even their own mothers for power and wealth. When it comes to maintaining control, Jerusalem is the most difficult city we have taken over. Because of the people's extreme disobedience, I always worry an uprising. Only 100 men and a centurion are under my command, thus I have very few soldiers. The governor of Syria told me that he didn't have nearly enough men to protect his own province when I asked for reinforcements. We seem to be more driven to grow than to protect what we have already achieved. I worry that this might ultimately result in our government's demise. Jesus of Nazareth appeared to be more sympathetic to the Romans than to the Jews themselves, which is why I have avoided direct contact with the people out of concern for what the priests might incite the rebels to do. Nevertheless, I have made an effort to better understand the mindset and concerns of this population. Of the many rumors I have heard, one in particular has caught my attention. It talks about a young man in Galilee who was teaching a new doctrine in the name of a god who had sent him. I once witnessed a sizable group of people gathering around a young guy who was chatting quietly while resting against a tree while I was walking through the plaza. When I found out it was Jesus, I wasn't surprised, since he was obviously the most noticeable of the people listening to him. I requested my secretary to blend in with the throng and listen to what he had to say, but I chose not to interfere by being there. Laius, my secretary, is the grandson of an ancient conspirator who spent years in Atturia waiting for Catiline. He has my utmost confidence, is faithful to me, and speaks Hebrew well. I have never seen in the works of philosophers anything that compares to the wisdom of what Jesus said when he told me what he had said when he returned to the pretorium. When one of the many Jewish rebels in Jerusalem asked Jesus if it was right to pay taxes to Caesar, he replied, "Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's." That wisdom is what led me to release the Nazarene, even though I had the power to arrest him or send him into exile in Pontus. This was because it would have been unfair, and justice is a basic tenet of Roman governance. Jesus was neither a rebel nor an agitator. Maybe he didn't even realize it, but I offered to protect him. Without my intervention, Jesus was able to act, speak, meet with the people, choose his followers, and teach. I, as a poor tool, shall have contributed to what the Jews refer to as providence, and we refer to as destiny, if Jesus replaces the religion of our forefathers one day, May the gods forbid it. And this tolerance may cause Rome to collapse. He would say to the scribes and Pharisees, "You are like serpents, appearing as well-decorated tombs on the outside, but inside you are full of death." On other occasions he criticized local customs, stating that humility was more valuable in God's eyes than any social status. This freedom I gave Jesus angered the wealthier and more powerful Jews. Jesus was harsh with them, and for me that was reason enough to keep him free. At the pretorium, I heard complaints about Jesus' audacity almost every day. They told me that Jerusalem had a history of stoning people who claimed to be prophets, and that something awful would happen to him. The Senate agreed with my choices and pledged reinforcements after the Persian War, but a petition to Caesar was still being prepared. I therefore made the decision to act to bring peace back to the city without lowering myself, since I lacked the forces to put down a possible rebellion. I messaged Jesus to invite him to the pretorium so we could have a conversation. He came. You know, I'm not easily intimidated or moved because I'm of Spanish and Roman descent, but when Jesus came, I was standing on the balcony and felt like my feet were glued to the marble floor. My entire body shook like someone with a guilty conscience, but the Nazarene remained calm, with a serenity that seemed like purity itself. As he got closer, he stopped and seemed to say, "I am here," without saying a word. For a long time, this guy, a sort our painters have never envisioned while portraying gods and heroes, both fascinated and pleased me. I felt weak and too old to approach him, yet there was nothing about him that repulsed me. Jesus of Nazareth, I have granted you complete freedom of expression for the past 3 years, and I do not regret it, I eventually stated in a shaky voice. There is wisdom and common sense in your words. I'm not sure whether you've read Plato or Socrates, but I know that the elegance and simplicity of your words place you head and shoulders above these philosophers. As his emissary here, I am glad to have given you the freedom you so richly deserve. But I must caution you that your words have drawn strong and misguided enemies. Just as Socrates had enemies and fell prey to them, so too have yours, and they are even more enraged, turned against you for the harshness of your words and against me for letting you speak freely. Some even accuse me of plotting with you to undermine the little civil power that Rome still permits the Hebrews. My recommendation, and not an order, is that you be more careful and moderate in your speech from now on, considering that your enemies may use pride to incite the ignorant people against you and force me to act according to the law. Ruler of the earth, your words do not come from true wisdom, Jesus gently said. Mount Tabor will respond that it abides by the rules of nature and the Creator God if you ask it to halt in the midst of the valley. Where the streams run, only He knows. The truth is that the blood of the righteous will be shed before the rose of Sharon blossoms. I will protect you from them. My pretorium will be a sacred refuge for you, day and night. Your blood will not be shed, I responded, moved. I value your wisdom more than all these rebellious Pharisees who abuse the freedom the Romans have granted them. They conspire against Caesar and defame him, making the people believe he is a tyrant who seeks their destruction. These ungrateful men do not realize that sometimes the wolf disguises itself as a sheep to accomplish its evil goals. When the time comes, there will be no refuge for the Son of Man, neither on earth nor beneath it. The true refuge is in the heavens. Jesus, as composed as usual, shook his head and smiled serenely, adding, "What was written by the prophets will be fulfilled." I said anxiously, "Young man, you are making me make my request into an order. The security of this province, which is my responsibility, requires it. You have to be more careful in your speech. Do not disobey this order, for you are aware of the consequences. May you be happy. Goodbye." Prince of the Earth, Jesus declared. "I was born on the same day that Augustus Caesar brought peace to the Roman Empire, and I did not come to bring disturbance, but peace, love, and charity. The persecutions are not because of me, but I know I will face many of them because of others in obedience to my Father's will, who has shown me the path to follow. You have no power to keep the victim on the altar of sacrifice, so use caution in your words." I was much relieved when he left after saying this, since I felt too burdened by his presence. He left like a light dying on the horizon. Herod, the king at the time and already quite old, joined Jesus' enemies to exact revenge. If it were up to him, he would have ordered Jesus' murder right away, but he was reluctant to do something that would hurt his standing with the Senate. Perhaps, like me, he was afraid of Jesus, but a Roman official was not allowed to show fear of a Jew. Herod came to the pretorium to see me, and as he got up to leave after a brief but insignificant conversation, he asked me what I thought of the Nazarene. I replied that Jesus appeared to be one of the great sages who from time to time appear in great nations, and that his teachings were not about politics. As a result, Rome had decided to let him speak freely because his deeds did not warrant any kind of punishment meant. Passover, the most significant Jewish holiday, was coming up, and there was a plan to take advantage of the general unrest that always swept the city at this time. A Roman centurion had been publicly humiliated, and the temple's treasury had been used to pay the people. I wrote the governor of Syria a letter seeking reinforcements, 100-foot soldiers and 100 cavalrymen, but he refused. I was left alone with few veterans in a hostile and rebellious city, without the power to control a potential rebellion, and had to suffer it. With the help of their leaders, they thought I was hiding the uprising and continued to yell, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Jesus was imprisoned on the pretense of being a rebel, even though they knew there was no cause to be afraid of the pretorium. They never forgave me for entering the holy city with banners bearing the image of the emperor, and even though I made a terrible mistake on that occasion, to them, the sacrilege was still unforgivable. There was another conflict among them too. I had proposed that some of the temple's treasury be used to finance public works, and the Pharisees, who were already against Jesus, did not accept this idea. They had little regard for the government and were bitter because the Nazarene had been scolding them in every place he had been to for the previous 3 years. Jesus was taken before the high priest and condemned to death because, in addition to these groups, I was also dealing with the wild and careless people who were always ready to join a revolt and exploit any disruption that may occur. At that moment, Caiaphas, the high priest, acted in a seemingly submissive manner, sending Jesus to me so that I could confirm the sentence and ensure the execution. I replied that, as Jesus was from Galilee, the case should be decided by Herod, and I ordered that he be taken to him. Herod then returned the decision to me, placing the entire responsibility in my hands. In a short time, my palace was under siege, the rebels were increasing in number, and Jerusalem was crowded with people coming down from the highlands of Nazareth. It seemed as if all of Judea was converging on the city. I saw the river on Mount Catherine fill with blood, the statues of Caesar weep, and the morning sun appear like a mourning virgin. If you do not heed your wife's warnings, a great misfortune awaits you. I walked to the halls of justice, flanked by my security, and firmly asked the audience what they wanted. The answer was unanimous: Jesus' death. The marble stairs of the pretorium rocked beneath the weight of the mob at that time. I questioned, what crime has he committed? He has profaned himself, foretold the temple's destruction, and proclaimed himself the Son of God, the Messiah, and the Jewish king. I retorted that no one was ever put to death for such charges under Roman jurisprudence, but the cries of "Crucify him! Crucify him!" reverberated through the angry mob, making the walls of the palace tremble. and Jesus was the only one who remained calm. I tried to argue, explaining that their actions were contrary to Jewish law and that the sentence required the consent of the Sanhedrin and the presence of its president. However, the people insisted that Jesus be crucified. The Sanhedrin required that a man stand at the court's door with a banner, while another mounted on horseback, pronouncing the condemned man's name, the crime committed, and the names of the witnesses, asking if anyone could testify in his favor. I then ordered Jesus to be flogged, thinking that this would suffice, but it only made them more hateful. I requested a basin and washed my hands in front of the angry mob, saying that, in my opinion, Jesus of Nazareth had done nothing that merited death. However, my words were in vain. Jesus' fate had already been sealed. It seemed as though all the spirits from the depths of hell had assembled in Jerusalem, and although I had seen mobs and civil riots before, nothing compared to that day. The crowd didn't just move. They were pushed and spun like a whirlwind, rushing in angry waves from the gates of the pretorium to Mount Zion with cries and shouts louder than any unrest I had ever heard in the disturbances of Pannonia or the Forum. As governor of a rebellious province, I stood in a corner of my basilica watching the grim scene as the innocent Nazarene was led to his execution. Jerusalem had emptied its people through the dark gates leading to Jamnia. Black clouds gathered over the temple and spread across the city, covering it like a dark shroud with visible signs both in the heavens and on earth. Dionysius the Patriarch is said to have claimed, "Either the Creator is suffering or the universe is falling apart." Bazar, a learned Jew from Antioch and a close friend of the Nazarene, was discovered dead after the earthquake. Whether his death was brought on by shock or grief is unknown. Near the first hour of the night, I wrapped myself in my cloak and descended into the city, heading toward the gates of Golgotha. The crowd, still unsettled, was returning to their homes with a somber sign of regret for what they had witnessed. I also saw my small Roman entourage passing silently, visibly shaken. The standard-bearer had draped the eagle with a cloth, a sign of mourning. Groups of men and women would occasionally pause and gaze toward Mount Calvary, as though they were waiting for a sign of some sort. And I went back to the pretorium with a heavy heart, climbing the stairs still stained with the blood of the Nazarene, and I saw an old man kneeling in prayer, surrounded by weeping Romans, and he threw himself at my feet, sobbing deeply. It always gets to you to see an old man weep, and my heart, which was already heavy, became even more burdened. We cried together, and it seemed that everyone there, him and many in the crowd, were on the verge of tears. Those who betrayed him, sold out, and shouted against him, those who demanded his crucifixion, disappeared like cowards, and I heard that some of them washed their mouths with vinegar, referring to what Jesus had said about the resurrection and the separation of the dead. When I finally gathered myself, I said, "Father, who are you and what do you want?" If it happened, it was there in front of that huge throng. I gave him permission to bury Jesus of Nazareth and told Malus to bring several soldiers to make sure the corpse wouldn't be disturbed. "My name is Joseph of Arimathea," he said. "I cannot say for sure what actually happened, but I thoroughly investigated the matter. You can check yourself and determine whether I made any mistakes, as Herod claims." A few days later, the tomb was discovered empty, and the disciples started to say that Jesus had risen, just as he had foretold. This caused even more commotion than his death itself. The day after the burial, a priest arrived in the pretorium, concerned that the disciples might take Jesus' body and make it appear as though he had risen, as he had predicted and as they firmly believed. I told the priest to dispatch as many Jewish soldiers as needed to surround the tomb so that, in the event of an incident, the blame would be placed on them rather than the Romans. Joseph buried Jesus in his own tomb, but I cannot be certain that he knew or had anything planned regarding the resurrection. I called for Isham, who described the events as accurately as possible. He said that around the fourth watch, a soft, enchanting light appeared over the tomb. At first, he thought it was the soldiers who had come to embalm Jesus' body. As he thought about this, the entire place was illuminated, and he saw what appeared to be a multitude of the dead in their burial shrouds, all appearing younger and full of joy, while heavenly music, the most beautiful he had ever heard, filled the air. When I asked him how he felt when he woke up, he said he was lying on the ground, face down. I asked if he might have mistaken the light he saw for the sunrise in the east. He replied that at first he thought so too, but after a short distance it was still quite dark, and he remembered it was too early for the sun to rise. When I asked him how long the scene lasted, he said he wasn't sure, but he thought it was almost an hour before the daylight overshadowed it. When I asked him if he had gone to the tomb after he calmed down, he replied that he hadn't because he was afraid, and they all went back to the barracks as soon as reinforcements arrived. I asked if the priests had questioned him, and he confirmed that they wanted him to claim it was an earthquake and that the guards had been sleeping. They offered him money to claim that the disciples had come and taken Jesus' body, but he claimed he didn't see any disciples and only found out about the body's disappearance when he was told. When I asked him what the priests he spoke with thought of Jesus, he told me that some thought he wasn't a regular man, not a human being like others, and that he wasn't the son of Mary as many people believed. Instead, they thought he was a figure who had appeared on earth before, such as in the times of Abraham and Lot, and on various other occasions and times. Both friends and enemies acknowledged that Jesus seemed to have control over the elements as if he were a potter shaping clay. He turned water into wine, healed diseases, raised the dead, calmed storms, and even made fish appear with coins in their mouths. If this Jewish theory is correct, then these conclusions seem to make sense. Thousands of people, both friends and opponents, are aware of these actions, and I lean toward the belief that, as someone said at the cross, truly, this was the Son of God. Even in the most tense situations, Jesus' face exuded kindness and peace, and his expression always reflected tranquility. Pontius Pilate described Jesus as an impressive figure, unlike any other. According to accounts, Jesus had long, soft hair that fell in harmony over his shoulders. His hair was described as light brown, almost blonde, and slightly wavy, which distinguished him from the local people. His eyes were also described as deep and piercing, though some claimed they ranged from light brown to blue. Jesus' face was regarded as beautiful and symmetrical, with features that inspired confidence and respect. Not just any face, but one that projected authority without appearing intimidating or threatening, and his full, well-groomed beard, which gave his appearance a touch of maturity and respect. His skin was described as fair, with a smooth texture, like someone who spent time outdoors, but still maintained a healthy and well-kept appearance. Jesus wore modest clothing, usually consisting of a long robe and a tunic, and he never wore jewelry or ostentatious adornments, reflecting his disengagement from worldly possessions. His appearance was simple and humble, and even with his striking presence, he could communicate a sense of peace and welcome without having to speak. With loyalty and respect to my sovereign, I remain your most obedient servant. And this is the most accurate account of the events that I am able to give you. I have made every effort to give you all the facts so that you can judge my behavior fairly. If you like this video and want to see more videos about mysteries like these, subscribe to the channel right now.